The ecology of the Rocky Mountains is diverse due to the effects of a variety of environmental factors. The Rocky Mountains are the major mountain range in western North America, running from the far north of British Columbia in Canada to New Mexico in the southwestern United States, climbing from the Great Plains at or below 1,800 feet to peaks of over 14,000 feet. Temperature and rainfall varies greatly also, and thus the Rockies are home to a mixture of habitats, including the alpine, subalpine, and boreal habitats of the northern Rocky Mountains in British Columbia and Alberta, the coniferous forests of Montana and Idaho, the wetlands and prairie where the Rockies meet the plains, a different mix of conifers on the Yellowstone Plateau in Wyoming and in the high Rockies of Colorado and New Mexico, and finally the alpine tundra of the highest elevations. These habitats are home to a great deal of wildlife, from herbivores such as elk, moose, mule deer, mountain goat, and bighorn sheep, to predators like cougar, Canada lynx, bobcat, black bear, grizzly bear, gray wolf, coyote, fox, and wolverine, along with a great variety of small mammals, fish, reptiles, and amphibians, numerous bird species, and tens of thousands of species of terrestrial and aquatic invertebrates and soil organisms. Permanent human settlement of the Rocky Mountains has caused numerous species to decline in population, including species of trout, birds, and sheep. Gray wolves and grizzly bears were almost eliminated from the United States portion of the range, but are returning due to conservation measures. The Rocky Mountains range in latitude between the Liard River in British Columbia and the Rio Grande in New Mexico, and in height up to the highest peak, Mount Elbert at 14,440 feet, taking in great valleys, such as the Rocky Mountain Trench and San Luis Valley. Precipitation ranges from 10 inches per year in the southern valleys to 60 inches per year locally in the northern peaks. Average January temperatures can range from 20 degrees Fahrenheit in Prince George, British Columbia, to 43 degrees Fahrenheit in Trinidad, Colorado. Ecologists divide the Rocky Mountain into a number of biotic zones, defined by whether they can support trees and the presence of one or more indicator species. Areas of the Rockies that do not support or have few trees include the prairie of the eastern foothills and the alpine tundra. The foothill prairie grassland lies to the east of the Rockies, where the mountains fall to meet the Great Plains at the Rocky Mountain front below, roughly 1,800 feet. Alpine tundra, meanwhile, occurs in regions above the treeline, which varies from 12,000 feet in New Mexico to 2,500 feet at the northern end. The USGS defines 10 forested zones in the Rocky Mountains. The more southern, warmer, drier zones are defined by the presence of pinyon pines, junipers, ponderosa pines, or oaks mixed with pines. The more northern, colder, wetter zones are defined by Douglas firs, Cascadian species, lodgepole pines, quaking aspens, or firs mixed with spruce. Near the treeline, zones can consist of white pines, or a mixture of white pine, fir, and spruce that appear as shrub-like crumholes. Finally, rivers and canyons are home to unique forest habitats, even in the more arid parts of the mountain range. Biotic zones and vegetation types in the Rocky Mountains can be explained by elevation, aspect, and precipitation. Clinton Merriam recognized that two-dimensional diagrams of elevation and aspect described plant community distribution in the southern Rocky Mountains. Other ecologists generally embrace this two-dimensional view until the complexities of environmental gradients, such as temperature, precipitation, solar radiation, wind, soils, and hydrology, could be described and modeled. Pete provided the most complete description of 10 major forest community types, which are summarized here. 2 non-forested vegetation types: plains and alpine tundra, described by Sims and Billings, are added. Because of the variations in latitude and precipitation along this huge mountain range, the elevations presented here are gross generalizations. Extensive investigations have been made of the forests of the Rocky Mountains. Weber cautioned that the vegetation zones overlap and telescope into each other considerably, in a landscape that is always full of surprises. The resulting patchwork mosaic of vegetation types and disturbance regimes leads to a complex of side-by-side communities, wildlife habitats, and species distributions. The eastern side of the Rocky Mountains is bordered by mixed grass prairie to the north and by short grass prairie to the south. The prairie, some of which has been described as the Montana Valley, and foothill grasslands, generally extends to elevations of 5,900 feet. Dominant plants of the mixed grass prairie include little blue stem, needlegrasses, wheatgrasses, sandreeds, and gramias, with dropseeds and cottonwoods in riparian zones. Short grass prairie species include little blue stem, buffalo grass, western wheatgrass, sand dropseed, ringgrass, needle and thread, June grass, and galeta. Extensions of these vegetation types reach well into the Rocky Mountains, along the valleys, and on dry slopes. Plant species composition varies locally with changes in soil characteristics and topographic position, that is, from hilltops to valley bottoms. Broad-leaved deciduous cottonwoods, alders and willows, and aspens line streamsides and canyons. The herbaceous layer in riparian communities is often more diverse than upslope areas and adjacent forests. Riparian and canyon vegetation types are generally too thin or too small to be displayed on regional vegetation maps, but the habitat is extremely important in the arid West. In the southern Rocky Mountains, a transition occurs between about 5,900 and 8,200 feet, where plains communities are accompanied by pinyon pines. Two needle pinyons and single-leaf pinyons are found in western Utah. Alligator junipers and Rocky Mountain junipers grow to the south, and Utah junipers grow to the north. Many shrubs and grasses of the plains occupy the gaps between tree outcrops. Heavy livestock grazing is associated with the spread of junipers, and fire suppression is partly responsible for their continued dominance. The appearance of ponderosa pine woodlands varies from scattered individuals in low elevation or rocky areas to dense forests at higher elevations or on deeper soils. Although ponderosa pines dominate the biomass of this community, other tree species such as Douglas fir and Rocky Mountain juniper, shrubs, and herb layers can develop. Typical intervals between natural fires are less than 40 years in most ponderosa pine forests. Fires that recur every 10 to 20 years suppresses the growth of Douglas fir saplings and encourages the growth of ponderosa pine. In geological time, ponderosa pine ecosystems are relatively new to the foothills of the central Rocky Mountains. An even newer addition to the ecosystem, European American settlers devastated the ponderosa pine forests through logging for houses, fencing, firewood, mine timbers, and railroad ties, and with fire. The ponderosa pine forests were close to the developing population centers at the forest prairie edge. The scale of the loss of ponderosa pine habitat is demonstrated best in several hundred paired photographs from the early 20th century and 1980s. However, nearly all the paired photographs also reveal that the most important feature of the ponderosa pine ecosystem is its resilience. Ponderosa pine seedlings establish quickly in disturbed sites. Research in the Front Range of Colorado shows a tenfold increase in ponderosa pine biomass since 1890 in many stands. This regeneration has restored habitat for many wildlife species, but has also led to unnatural forest densities in many areas. In the southern Rocky Mountains, lower slopes of ponderosa pine communities can be accompanied by gamble oaks, other oak species. In the absence of fire, the oak stands may be invaded by pines. Douglas firs grow in a broad range from Mexico to British Columbia, generally from near lower treeline upward in elevation to spruce fir forests. In Colorado, the species ranges from about 5,410 to 8,860 feet and is often found in mixed stands with ponderosa pine, blue spruce, or lodgepole pine. Like ponderosa pine, Douglas fir is tolerant of frequent, low-intensity surface fires. High-intensity fire intervals in Douglas fir forests in Wyoming average 50 to 100 years. Several tree species commonly associated with the Cascade Mountains grow on the rain-swept western slopes of the northern Rocky Mountains. These include western hemlock, western red cedar, grand fir, mountain hemlock, and larches. These forests are subject to infrequent high-intensity fire. Lodgepole pine forests, interspersed with stands of quaking aspens, are fire-resilient forests that dominate the central and north-central Rocky Mountains. Usually found between 8,200 and 10,500 feet in Colorado, lodgepole pines and aspens grow rapidly after fire in mostly even-aged stands. In the Canadian Rockies, the lodgepole pine quaking aspen forests occur in the foothills, mixed with white spruce and balsam poplar. In the northern Canadian Rockies, black spruce also occurs in this biotic zone. Intervals between fires typically range from 100 to 300 years. The subalpine forests of the Rocky Mountains are characterized by spruces and firs and are floristically and structurally similar to the boreal conifer forests. To the north, dominant tree species in the Colorado Rocky Mountains, subalpine forests include Engelmann spruce and subalpine fir, as well as lodgepole pine and the occasional Douglas fir. In the Black Hills of South Dakota, white spruce replaces Engelmann spruce. Further north are the lodgepole pine, Engelmann spruce, and alpine fir mix of the Alberta mountain forests, above 5,495 feet of elevation. Stand replacing fires typically occur at 200 to 400 year intervals. Widespread insect outbreaks in spruce fir forests occur more frequently. 1. Recently, spruce bark beetles have begun to impact more old-growth spruce trees in these forests. On exposed dry slopes at high elevations, subalpine white pine forests replace spruce fir forests. Common species of the white pine forests include white bark pine in the northern Rocky Mountains, limber pine in the central and north-central Rocky Mountains, and bristlecone pine in the southern Rocky Mountains. Typical intervals between fires range from 50 to 300 years. The white pines are tolerant of extreme environmental conditions and can be important post-fire successional species. The white bark pine is a keystone species in upper subalpine forests of the northern Rocky Mountains. However, the white bark pine has been in decline due to white pine blister rust. White bark pine mortality in some areas exceeds 90%. Entire forest vistas, like that at Avalanche Ridge near Yellowstone National Park's East Gate, are expanses of dead, gray whitebarks. Treeline is the elevation above which trees cannot grow. It is controlled by a complex of environmental conditions, primarily soil temperatures and the length of the growing season, which becomes shorter with higher elevations. The elevation of treeline rises steadily at the rate of 330 feet per degree of latitude from the northern to the southern Rocky Mountains. Dominant treeline species, including spruces, firs, and white pines, often have a shrub-like form in response to the extreme conditions at the elevational limits of their physiological tolerance. Such dwarf trees are called crumbholes. Crumbholes islands may actually move about 3/4 inch per year in response to the wind. They reproduce by vegetative layering on their lee sides. The Rocky Mountains are important habitat for a great deal of wildlife, such as elk, moose, mule deer, white-tailed deer, pronghorn, mountain goat, bighorn sheep, black bear, grizzly bear, gray wolf, coyote, cougar, bobcat, Canada lynx, and wolverine. North America's largest herds of moose is in the Alberta, British Columbia foothills forests. The status of most species in the Rocky Mountains is unknown due to incomplete information. Even basic regional information is not available on many nocturnal species. invertebrates, lichens, mosses and fungi, and soil microorganisms. European American settlement of the mountains has adversely impacted native species. Examples of some species that are known to have declined include western toads, greenback cutthroat trout, white sturgeons, white-tailed ptarmigans, trumpeter swans, and bighorn sheep. In the United States portion of the mountain range, apex predators, such as grizzly bears and gray wolves, had been extirpated from their original ranges, but have partially recovered due to conservation measures and reintroduction. Other recovering species include the bald eagle and the peregrine falcon. Species such as the black bear and mountain lion, many small mammals, and common bird and plant species are described as stable because, in most instances, the populations are persistent and not rapidly increasing or declining. Although most of the animals in the Rocky Mountains are invertebrates, little is known about this component of the region's fauna. As one entomologist stated, "We do not know how many species of moths and butterflies live in any state, county, or locality in North America." In a few areas in the western United States, information is available on the species richness of moths and butterflies. Most of the Rocky Mountain states and the Front Range of Colorado, in particular, support high species richness of butterflies and moths. In Colorado, the diverse habitats, from prairie to tundra, support about 2,000 species of butterflies, moths, and skippers. More than 1,000 species are in the Front Range. Some species of grasshoppers are unique to individual mountaintops in Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah. The Rocky Mountain locust, a common pest to farmers in the 19th century, is now extinct. Heavy grazing along river valleys in Montana and Idaho is thought to have irreparably destroyed locust breeding areas. Globally, populations of amphibians are declining in size as a result of habitat loss, predation by non-indigenous sport fishes, timber harvest, increased ultraviolet radiation, and disease. The widespread declines of amphibian populations throughout the Rocky Mountains mirror these global trends. Western toads, once common between altitudes of 7,500 and 13,800 feet throughout the central and northern Rocky Mountains, now occupy less than 20% of their previous range, from southern Wyoming to northern New Mexico. 11 populations of western toads disappeared from the West Elk Mountains of Colorado between 1974 and 1982 because of a bacterial infection and perhaps multiple sublethal environmental causes. The number of breeding sites in Rocky Mountain National Park has declined to only 3. In the past 2 decades, western toads disappeared from 83% of their historical range in Colorado and from 94% of Wyoming sites. Populations of northern leopard frogs are significantly declining throughout the Rocky Mountains. The Rocky Mountains are home to a number of cold-water fish in the trout and salmon families, including rainbow trout, bull trout, lake trout, cutthroat trout, brown trout, brook trout, golden trout, mountain whitefish, Arctic grayling, and Dolly Varden. Many of these, however, are introduced, such as rainbow, brown, and brook trout. Colorado River cutthroat trout were once abundant in mountainous tributaries of the Green and Colorado rivers, but non-native brown, brook, and rainbow trout had displaced them by the 1930s. They still survived in some isolated pockets, however, and these populations have been used to restore the cutthroats to many areas in their historic range. One of the largest strongholds was, and is, Trappers Lake in Colorado's Flat-Top Mountains. However, in 1984, brook trout invaded because a flood washed them downstream from nearby Crescent Lake. By 2003, brook trout comprised 40% of the lake's fish population. Brook trout have an advantage over cutthroat trout because they spawn in fall. By the time Colorado River cutthroats hatch in August, brook trout fingerlings may be able to eat them. Colorado Parks and Wildlife is controlling their population with large nets and selective removal. Rio Grande cutthroat trout currently live on 700 miles of stream in the Santa Fe National Forest, which is approximately 91% of their historical range.